I hid my $55,000 salary as a cleaner from my son. His wife said, "Your poor mother is a disgrace. Let her leave!" I left silently, but he didn't know that it was I who paid for their house. A month later, I took everything back. Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think that quiet was the same as peace. For most of my life, I believed that if I kept my head down, worked hard, and loved my family without condition, everything would find its proper place. I was wrong, but it took me 64 years to understand that, and one evening in my son's kitchen to finally accept it. My name is Martha Ellison. I spent 31 years cleaning other people's spaces. Offices, lobbies, conference rooms that smelled of expensive cologne and cold ambition. I worked nights at the Hargrove Corporate Center in downtown Cleveland. 4 floors of glass and steel that housed law firms, a financial consulting group, and a tech startup that always left pizza boxes next to the recycling bin. The work was honest. My hands knew what they were doing, and at the end of every shift, I could look at those gleaming floors and know I had done something real. My salary was $55,000 a year, with benefits. Not glamorous, but solid. More solid than most people assumed when they looked at a woman in a gray uniform pushing a mop cart. I had been a widow for 11 years by then. My husband, Gerald, died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in March, right after breakfast. He was 55. After that, I learned to need less. I sold the big house on Fernwood Drive, moved into a small apartment on the east side, and started saving with a discipline that would have surprised even Gerald. I didn't need much, but I gave generously, especially to Daniel. Daniel was my only child. 38 years old, handsome in the way Gerald had been handsome. Broad shoulders, easy smile. He worked in logistics management for a regional shipping company, decent salary, nothing spectacular. When he married Christina 6 years ago, I told myself I was happy for him. And for a while, I think I was. Christina was from a family that measured worth in square footage and zip codes. She was not cruel in the beginning. Or perhaps she was. And I simply wasn't paying attention. She had a way of smiling while she said things that landed like small stones. "Oh, Martha, you still take the bus? How retro." Or, "Daniel mentioned you used to have a bigger place. What happened?" Questions that weren't really questions. Observations designed to establish a hierarchy. But I said nothing. I smiled and passed the bread rolls and told myself that young people were different now, that I was too sensitive, that what mattered was Daniel's happiness. What I never told either of them, not Daniel, not Christina, not anyone, was that I had been quietly paying the mortgage on their house for 2 years. It had started practically enough. Daniel had stretched himself thin buying the property on Sycamore Lane, a 4-bedroom colonial with a finished basement and a yard that Christina had insisted on. The mortgage was $2,100 a month. When Daniel called me in a panic 18 months after the wedding, saying they were 3 payments behind and the bank had sent a formal notice, I didn't hesitate. I set up a direct payment from my account to the lender. I told Daniel it was a temporary loan. He said he'd pay me back. We never put it in writing. And month after month the payment went out and nothing came back, and somehow we never spoke of it directly again. Why didn't I ask for a formal agreement? I've asked myself that question more times than I can count. The honest answer is that I was his mother. I didn't want to make it transactional. I didn't want him to feel ashamed. I thought love worked better without contracts. I didn't know yet that love without documentation is invisible. The evening it happened, I had come to Sycamore Lane after my shift. It was a Thursday in October, just past 7. I still had my work bag with me, the plain canvas tote with the Hargrove ID clipped to the front. I'd stopped by because Daniel had mentioned his back was bothering him, and I'd brought a heating pad I wasn't using. Christina was in the kitchen when I came in. Daniel was somewhere in the back of the house. I set the bag on the counter and said something ordinary. I don't even remember what. And Christina turned from the stove and looked at me, and something in her expression had shifted. Not sudden, settled, like a decision she had already made. "Martha," she said, and her voice was even, almost pleasant. "I've been meaning to say something for a while. Daniel and I have talked, and honestly, I think it would be better if you didn't come by so often. Your visits make things uncomfortable. And frankly," she paused, her eyes moving briefly to my canvas bag, my uniform pants, my sensible shoes. "Your mother is a poor embarrassment, and she should leave." She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The words were quiet and absolute, like a door closing. I stood there for a moment. I looked at the kitchen in the house whose roof I had been keeping over their heads for 24 months. I looked at Christina's face, composed and satisfied. And then I picked up my bag, said nothing, and walked out. I drove home in the dark, both hands steady on the wheel, but my mind was already beginning to move. I did not cry that night. I wanted to, or at least some part of me expected to. I had always been someone who cried quietly and privately, the way my mother had taught me. You feel it, you let it move through you, and then you return to the work. But when I sat down at the kitchen table in my apartment on Chestnut Street, took off my shoes, and spread my hands flat on the surface in front of me, what I felt wasn't grief. It was something colder, more precise. I sat there for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street below. I thought about Christina's face, that particular quality of satisfaction in it, the way she had looked at my shoes, and I thought about Daniel. Where had he been? In the back of the house, she'd said. Did he know she was going to say it? Had they discussed it? The way she claimed, sitting together on the couch I had helped pay for. In the house whose mortgage I processed every single month like a bill of my own? I got up and went to my filing cabinet. A 2-drawer metal unit I kept in the bedroom closet, the kind that looked unremarkable unless you knew what was inside it. I pulled out the folder I had labeled simply SL for Sycamore Lane. In it were 24 months of bank transfer records, every payment, every confirmation number, dates, amounts, the lender's name, Keystone Mortgage Services. $2,100 again and again and again. $50,000. $400 in total. Quietly sent. Never acknowledged in writing. Never repaid. I laid the papers out on the table and looked at them under the lamp. This was the shape of what I had given. Not a gift. I had never called it that. Not a loan, exactly, because there was no agreement. It existed in a strange legal space that I was only beginning to understand might matter very much. Was I angry? Yes. But anger without direction is just heat. What I needed was clarity. I slept badly that night, but I slept. In the morning, I made coffee, sat at the same table, and began to think methodically. The first thing I understood was that I was not powerless. I had money, not a fortune, but a cushion. I had my salary, my savings account at First Federal, with just over $34,000 in it, my work pension accruing steadily, and a small investment account Gerald had opened in the 1990s that I had never touched, and that had grown to just under $28,000. I had no debt. I owned nothing connected to that house except the paper trail in my folder. The second thing I understood was that the mortgage on Sycamore Lane was still in a specific arrangement. One that, when I had set up the payments, the loan officer had confirmed was tied to a co-payment authorization I had signed. I remembered that moment. Daniel had added me as an authorized payer on the account. At the time, it was administrative convenience. But now, I turned that memory over carefully, like a coin. An authorized payer could also stop paying. The question was not whether I had the right to stop. I clearly did. I had been paying voluntarily from my own account, and there was no legal instrument requiring me to continue. The question was, what would happen when I did? The mortgage was 31 months from its third anniversary, which triggered a rate adjustment. If 2 payments were missed, Keystone would issue a formal default notice. 3 missed payments meant the foreclosure process could begin. I knew this because I had read every document carefully when Daniel first called me in a panic. I was thorough that way. I took a notepad and wrote down 4 things. 1. Stop the automatic payment. 2. Consult an attorney about the legal status of the $50,400 already paid. 3. Review what other financial connections I had to their household. 4. Say nothing to Daniel or Christina until I was ready. That last point was the most important. Whatever I decided to do, I could not afford to move from emotion. Christina had dismissed me because she believed I was powerless. A poor woman in a uniform who could be sent away without consequence. If I called Daniel in the morning, upset and accusing, I would only confirm her version of me. I would be the difficult mother, the embarrassment, exactly what she had called me. Number 1, I was going to be something else entirely. I thought about the attorney. I needed someone who handled property and contract disputes, not a general practitioner. My neighbor Ruth had used a woman named Patricia Hale after her landlord dispute. Ruth had described her as the kind of lawyer who takes notes like she's already in court. That sounded right to me. I called Ruth at 9 in the morning and asked for the number. "Martha," Ruth said, hearing something in my voice. "Are you okay?" "I'm going to be," I said. "I just need a name." Patricia Hale's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Euclid Avenue, the kind of office that felt intentionally calm. Neutral walls, a clean desk, diplomas in plain frames. She was in her mid-50s, sharp-eyed, with reading glasses she wore on a cord around her neck and a habit of writing in the margins while you talked. I liked her immediately. I sat across from her on a Wednesday afternoon, 2 days after the kitchen. I had brought the SL folder, my bank statements, and a written timeline I had prepared the night before. Dates, amounts, and what I remembered of the verbal conversations with Daniel. Patricia read everything without interrupting me. Then she set it all down and looked at me. "You've been paying their mortgage for 24 months, she said. "Yes." "No written loan agreement?" "No." "No promissory note, no signed acknowledgement from your son?" "Nothing in writing." She was quiet for a moment, tapping her pen against her notepad. "All right. The good news is that the transfers are documented on your end. Bank records are legally sufficient evidence of payment. The question is what legal theory we'd use if you wanted to pursue recovery of those funds. Unjust enrichment is the most likely avenue. It's not a slam dunk without a written agreement, but given the amounts and the consistency of payment, a judge would likely find it credible." She paused. "Are you looking to recover the money?" I thought about it carefully before I answered. "I'm not sure yet. Right now, I want to understand my options, and I want to stop the payments. That you can do immediately and unilaterally. You're an authorized payer, not a co-borrower. You have no legal obligation to continue." Hearing her say it plainly, no legal obligation, did something specific to the weight I'd been carrying. It didn't disappear, but it shifted into something I could work with. Patricia advised me to send written notification to Keystone Mortgage Services that I was withdrawing as authorized payer and to cancel the automatic transfer from my account. She also suggested I keep all communications with Daniel and Christina in writing going forward, and to avoid any in-person confrontations until I had decided what legal steps, if any, I intended to pursue. "Document everything from here," she said. "Every call, every text, every email. Even if nothing comes of it legally, you'll be glad you have a record." I stopped the automatic payment that evening, online, from my kitchen table. Then I sent the written withdrawal notice to Keystone. My hands were steady the entire time. It was 4 days before Daniel called. I was at work when my phone buzzed. It was just past midnight, between my sweep of the 3rd floor and my break. I didn't answer. He called again 20 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened to the message on my break, sitting on a bench in the service corridor with my coffee, his voice was careful, measured in a way that told me he had planned what to say. Mom, hey, Christina mentioned you stopped by the other night and, look, I think there might have been a miscommunication. Can you call me back? There's something with the mortgage. The bank sent a notice. I just want to understand what's happening. A miscommunication? Is that what it was? I sat with that word for a long moment, there in the corridor that smelled of cleaning solution and old carpet. A miscommunication. Your wife told me I was a poor embarrassment and to leave. And that was a miscommunication. I did not call back that night. I sent a text the following morning, brief and polite. Received your message. I'm fine. I'll be in touch soon. Nothing about the mortgage. 2 days later, Daniel appeared at my apartment. I heard the knock at 7:15 in the evening. When I opened the door, he looked like he hadn't slept well. He came in and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had spread the transfer records, though the folder was back in its cabinet now, and he said without preamble, Mom, Keystone sent a default warning notice. They said the automatic payment was canceled. What's going on? I looked at my son. His face was confused and a little frightened. And for a moment I felt the familiar pull, the mother instinct to soothe, to explain, to make it easier for him. But I thought of Christina's voice. Your mother is a poor embarrassment. She should leave. I decided to stop, I said. Stop? Why? You can't just... He caught himself. I didn't even know you'd been paying. I assumed it was coming from savings, that we'd work it out. You assumed? I said quietly. For 24 months? He went still. That stillness was the first proof I needed. Not legal proof, but human proof. He had known. Not the full amount, perhaps, not every detail. But he had known the money was coming from somewhere. And he had let himself not ask. Because asking would have meant accounting for it. The conversation did not go well after that. He left frustrated and unsatisfied. But I had what I came for. I had watched his face when I said you assumed for 24 months, and I had seen the thing he was trying not to show me. He knew. He had always known. After Daniel left, I sat for a while in the quiet of my apartment and did something I hadn't done in days. I ate a proper dinner. Soup I had made on Sunday. Bread from the bakery 2 blocks down. I ate slowly, and I thought, and by the time I was washing the bowl, I knew what the next step was. I called Patricia Hale the following morning and told her about Daniel's visit. She listened, then said, the fact that he acknowledged awareness of the payments, even indirectly, is useful. I want you to write down exactly what he said, as close to verbatim as you can, with the date and time. Send it to me today. I did, as soon as I got off the phone. A full page of notes, typed up and emailed. Then I went to see a second person. His name was Robert Finch, a financial advisor I had used twice before. Once when Gerald died, and I had to restructure everything, and once 3 years ago when I rolled over a retirement account. His office was in a low brick building in Lakewood, comfortable and unpretentious. I told him I wanted to review my full financial picture and separate my assets in a way that made my personal accounts completely clear and unambiguous. He pulled up my records and we spent 2 hours going through everything: savings, pension, the investment account. I had him help me open a new dedicated account at a different institution, one with no connection whatsoever to anything Daniel or Christina might have had a peripheral awareness of. "Are you expecting a legal situation?" Robert asked. "I'm expecting to be prepared for one," I said. He nodded and didn't ask further. He was a practical man. For a few days, nothing happened. Daniel sent 2 texts, one asking if we could talk, one asking if I was doing okay. I replied to each briefly and without information. Then, on a Saturday afternoon, 11 days after that kitchen conversation, my phone rang and the name on the screen was Christina. I let it ring through. She called again 30 seconds later. I answered. "Martha." Her voice was different from the evenings at the house, sharper, less curated. "I think we need to have a real conversation about what you're doing." "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I stopped a voluntary payment." "You stopped? You stopped the mortgage payment on our house. Do you understand that? The bank is going to—" She stopped, and I could hear her recalibrating. When she spoke again, the sharpness was wrapped in something that wanted to sound reasonable. "Look, I understand there may have been some tension when you were here, but this is not the way to handle a family disagreement. You're going to damage your relationship with Daniel. And honestly, you could be putting yourself in a difficult position legally if you're trying to—" "Christina," I said, "I have a lawyer." Silence. "I've been advised not to discuss the particulars on the phone," I continued. My voice surprised me. It was so steady. "If you or Daniel have questions about the payments, your attorney can contact mine." I gave her Patricia Hale's office name, then I said goodbye and hung up. What followed was not silence, but something more like the pause before weather changes. 3 days later, on a Tuesday evening, both of them came to my apartment building. I saw their car in the lot from my window before they buzzed up. I let them in, not because I wasn't prepared, but because I had decided that refusing to see them would give them a narrative. "She won't even talk to us. She's being unreasonable." They came upstairs. Daniel was pale. Christina's jaw was set in a way that signaled she was leading this visit. She sat at my kitchen table and said, without any preliminary warmth, that I had no legal right to withhold payments that I had committed to making, that they had arranged their finances around my contributions, that if I was trying to manipulate them, I should know that Daniel could contest the payments as family support arrangements, which might have tax implications for me. Did she actually understand what she was saying? Or was she repeating something she'd found on an internet forum at 2 in the morning, desperate and frightened? "The word you're looking for," I said, "is unjust enrichment. And it generally applies to the person who received money they had no legal right to, not the person who gave it." I kept my voice pleasant. "You're welcome to have your attorney reach out to mine." Christina's face did something complicated. She looked at Daniel. Daniel said quietly, "Mom, come on. We just want to work this out." "Then have your attorney call Patricia Hale," I said. "That's the appropriate way to work it out." They left 20 minutes later. Christina's heels were sharp on the hallway floor, and the sound got farther and farther away until it was gone. I closed the door. I stood in my hallway for a moment with my eyes shut. My heart was beating faster than I would have liked, but I had not moved an inch. That weekend, I drove out to Lake Erie and sat near the water for an afternoon. I brought a thermos of coffee and a book I'd been meaning to read for months. I didn't think about the mortgage or the lawyers or Christina's face. I watched the water and let myself rest. I needed the stillness because I knew the next part was coming. The week after the lake was a quiet one, which I didn't trust. In my experience, that particular kind of quiet, the kind where people who have been loud suddenly go still, usually meant they were reorganizing. I was right. On Wednesday evening, Daniel called without Christina on the line. I knew the difference immediately. His voice was softer, more hesitant, the way it had been when he was a teenager and wanted something he wasn't sure I'd give him. He said he wanted to apologize for the tension, that Christina had been stressed, that the house situation was putting pressure on both of them, that he knew things had gotten out of hand. He didn't mention what Christina had said to me in the kitchen. He spoke around it with the practiced ease of someone who has decided that the center of the problem doesn't need to be named. I was thinking, he said after a pause, that maybe we could find a different arrangement. You know, something that worked for everyone. Maybe you could come back to the payments just temporarily, and we'd draw something up properly this time. A real agreement. Christina even said she'd be open to that. I sat with the phone against my ear and thought about what he was offering me. A real agreement. Now. Now. When the threat of consequences had become concrete. Not 2 years ago, when I was simply giving. Not 6 months ago, when I might have asked and been grateful for the suggestion. Now. Why did people think that offering to do the right thing at the last possible moment erased the 24 months of not doing it? I appreciate you calling, Daniel, I said. I really do. But I've asked you to work through the attorneys. That's still my position. Mom, attorneys make everything worse. That's been your experience, I said. It's not mine. He was quiet. Then, she said things she shouldn't have said, when you were here. I know that. I know you know, I said. Another silence. Longer. I don't know what you want from me, he finally said. And there was something raw in it. Genuine, I thought. But genuine wasn't enough to undo what had been built over 2 years of silence. Right now, I said. I want you to get some rest. Good night, Daniel. I hung up and stood at my kitchen window for a while, looking at the street. The call had been the first act. I suspected the second was coming. It came in the form of a card, which I found in my mailbox 3 days later. A card, actual paper, the kind you buy at a drugstore, with a faint floral design on the cover. Inside, in Christina's handwriting, which I recognized from birthday cards over the years, was a message that took me 3 readings to fully absorb. Martha, I know I've been difficult. I've been under enormous pressure, and I took it out on you, which wasn't fair. I'd like to start over if you're willing. Christina, no mention of the mortgage. No mention of what she'd actually said. Difficult. As if she had simply been short-tempered. As if the word she'd used, embarrassment, was a small lapse, a blip. Not a judgment she had delivered while looking at my work shoes. I put the card on my counter and looked at it. Was I supposed to be moved? I asked myself that plainly. Was I supposed to feel that this small paper gesture outweighed $50,400 in 2 years of silence and a quiet evening in October, when I had been sent out of a house I'd been holding up? I took a photo of the card and emailed it to Patricia, noting the date and that it had arrived without any accompanying legal communication. Keep it, Patricia replied. It's evidence of informal contact after we establish the formal channel. Useful if they later claim you were unresponsive. I kept it. The support I was looking for didn't come from a lawyer's office, though. It came from closer. I had a small circle. Ruth next door, my co-worker Diane, who had been at Hargrove for 19 years, and my sister Peggy in Columbus, who called every Sunday without fail. That Saturday, I drove to Columbus. Peggy and I sat in her kitchen, the one that always smelled like coffee and whatever she was baking, and I told her everything. All of it. The payments, the kitchen, Christina's face, the card, the attorneys. Peggy listened without interrupting. When I was done, she poured us both more coffee and said, Martha, I need you to hear me say this plainly. You are not the problem in this story. It sounds simple. It sounds like something everyone should already know about themselves. But there is a particular way that someone who loves you, who has known you your entire life, can say something true and land it differently than any logic or any legal opinion can. I felt it move through me like something unclenching. I've been afraid, I admitted, that I'm being cold, that I should just forgive and repair it. You can forgive, Peggy said, without funding them. I drove home on Sunday evening and felt, for the first time in weeks, like my footing was solid. The following Monday, I asked Patricia where we stood, and she told me she had received formal contact from Daniel and Christina's attorney, a man named Greg Novak, who had sent a letter claiming that my withdrawal of payments constituted a breach of an implied agreement and that they intended to pursue damages. I read the letter at Patricia's desk and felt strangely relieved. They had made it official. Good, so would I. Patricia's response to Novak's letter was measured and immediate. She outlined, in precise legal language, that I had been a voluntary authorized payer with no contractual obligation, and that any claim of implied agreement would need to demonstrate clear evidence of mutual intent, which, given the complete absence of written documentation on their end, would be a significant evidentiary challenge. She copied me on the letter and called to summarize. "They're testing you," she said. "Novak's letter is a pressure move. They want to see if the threat of litigation makes you fold." "Does it?" I asked, and I think she heard something in my voice because she made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Based on our conversations so far," she said, "no, I don't think it does." She was right. But I would be dishonest if I said I wasn't afraid. Fear and resolve, I was learning, were not opposites. They could exist in the same breath, in the same moment. Fear of what could be lost or damaged, and resolve about what would not be surrendered. 4 days after Patricia sent her response, Daniel and Christina came to my apartment again. This time, I had not seen their car first. They buzzed up without warning on a Sunday afternoon when I was reading on the couch in my housecoat. I almost didn't let them up, but I thought of what Peggy had said, "You can forgive without funding them," and I thought about the narrative again. I buzzed them in. They came in together, and the apartment immediately felt different with the two of them in it. More pressurized, like a room with a weather system moving through it. I offered them seats. I did not offer coffee. I sat across from them with my hands in my lap and waited. Christina went first, and the performance was notable. She was composed, warmer than I had seen her in years, her voice pitched to the register of reason. She said that she and Daniel had talked, really talked, and that they felt terrible about how things had unfolded, that she personally felt terrible about the things she had said, that they understood I was hurt. But then, and here the register shifted just slightly, the way a musical key changes under a melody so gradually you almost don't notice. She said that the situation they were in was not sustainable, that the mortgage was now in formal default proceedings, that they stood to lose the house, and that whatever had passed between us, I had to understand that there was more at stake here than feelings. "You built a relationship with this house," she said. "You were part of this. You made choices that led Daniel and me to make plans. And now, those plans are at risk." She paused. "Let that settle. Withdrawing now, whatever your feelings are, is not something you can do without consequences for all of us." Was she blaming me for the default on a mortgage I had been paying out of my own pocket for 2 years, while she was in that house calling me an embarrassment? I looked at her carefully, at the careful construction of what she was saying, the way it reframed every dynamic, made my choice to stop paying sound like an act of sabotage rather than a withdrawal of extraordinary generosity. "Christina," I said, "I've asked you to communicate through the attorneys." "Martha." Now something harder broke through the composure. "We don't have time for attorneys. We have a 30-day window before this goes to foreclosure status, and there is a permanent mark on our credit. You can end this right now. Today. If you reinstate the payments—" "I'm not reinstating the payments," I said. "We can drop the legal claim and—" "My attorney will contact yours," I said. Daniel made a sound. Not quite a word, something between frustration and helplessness. "Mom, please, we could lose our home." "The home," I said carefully, "that I have been paying for." A silence opened in the room that was different from the others. Not uncomfortable, but revealing. Because in that silence, neither of them said what I had expected. Neither of them said yes, and we are deeply sorry, and we want to make it right. What Christina said after a moment was, "We can't be responsible for decisions you made on our behalf without consulting us." There it was, clean and complete. The $50,400 I had given was now a decision I had made unilaterally, something they hadn't asked for, a choice I was now trying to leverage against them. I stood up. "I think you should go," I said. Christina's composure broke entirely. She stood too, and her voice came out sharp and high. "You are being vindictive. You are a bitter old woman who can't stand that your son has his own life, and you are using money as a weapon because you have nothing else." "Please leave," I said. Daniel took her arm. She was rigid for a moment, then she turned and walked out. Daniel paused in the doorway, and he looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. It had shame in it, and frustration, and something else. Then he left too. I closed the door. I leaned my back against it. My hands, when I looked at them, were trembling slightly. I was frightened. Not of them, exactly, but of the fact that love and damage can live in such close proximity to each other. Daniel was still my son. That had not changed. And maybe that was what frightened me most, but I felt something else underneath the fear. Something that had been building since the kitchen in October, since the transfer records on the table, since Patricia Hale's clean and certain voice. I was not going to move. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning in mid-January, 6 weeks after that Sunday afternoon, when I'd asked them to leave. It was not a courtroom. Patricia had recommended mediation as an initial step, both to demonstrate good faith and because, as she put it, "I'd rather let them reveal themselves in a room than spend your money on a trial if we can avoid it." The location was a law office in Midtown Cleveland, a conference room on the 8th floor with a long table, water glasses, and a mediator named Stephen Cho, who was a former family court judge and looked like a man who had stopped being surprised by anything people did to each other. Patricia sat to my left. Across the table were Daniel and Christina, and beside them their attorney, Greg Novak, a man in his late 40s who wore a good suit and had the manner of someone accustomed to winning through volume and repetition. I had been prepared. Patricia had spent an hour with me 2 days before, going through exactly what would happen, what I would be asked, and, most importantly, what I did not need to explain or justify. "You don't have to defend yourself," she had said. "Let the documents do it." The documents were considerable. Patricia had assembled them into a single organized binder. 24 months of bank transfer records, each with the corresponding Keystone mortgage confirmation. The authorization form I had signed as an authorized payer. Daniel's text message to me from November, in which he had written, and this was the sentence Patricia had highlighted, "I know you've been carrying a lot for us and I don't say it enough, but thank you." He had sent that text 7 months before the kitchen incident. He had never imagined I would be sitting across a table from him with it printed on page 17 of a legal binder. Novak opened for their side. His argument was essentially what Christina had gestured toward in my apartment, that I had voluntarily entered into an informal family support arrangement, that Daniel and Christina had structured their lives in reasonable reliance on that arrangement, and that my sudden withdrawal constituted a breach of an implied agreement. He used phrases like detrimental reliance and reasonable expectation, with practiced fluency. When it was Patricia's turn, she was brief and precise. She noted that no legal instrument had ever been created, that I had no contractual obligation, that under Ohio law, implied agreement claims in family financial contexts require clear and convincing evidence of mutual intent, which, she noted, did not appear to exist, given that her client had been characterized in her own son's home as, and here she read directly from the notes I had given her, a poor embarrassment who should leave. That phrase, read aloud in a conference room in a measured legal voice, did something to the air. Novak's expression didn't change, he was too trained for that. But Christina's did. A flush moved up her throat. The individual who made that statement, Patricia continued, did so in a home being financially supported by my client, apparently without full awareness of that fact. We would argue that this speaks directly to the nature of the arrangement, not a mutual agreement, but a unilateral act of generosity that was never acknowledged, discussed, or reciprocated, and that was rendered invisible precisely because it was convenient for the beneficiaries to treat it as invisible. Stephen Cho was writing notes. He had not looked up from his pad. Novak began to reframe. He suggested that the text message could be interpreted broadly, that carrying a lot was vague. Patricia had anticipated this. She produced the bank statements for the corresponding months, laid them next to the texts, and let the alignment speak. $2,100. $2,100. $2,100. 24 times. This isn't vague, Patricia said simply. Christina leaned over to Novak and whispered something. He listened, then said, "My clients would like to take a brief recess." We recessed. In the hallway, Patricia and I stood near a window that looked down at the street, and she said quietly, "They're rattled. Novak is probably telling them right now that the detrimental reliance argument is shakier than he'd hoped. Do you think they'll settle?" "I think Novak is telling them to." When we reconvened, something had shifted. Christina was still, controlled. But it was the stillness of someone concentrating very hard on maintaining a surface. Daniel looked like a man who had received news he had been half expecting for a long time. Novak made a settlement offer. They would drop the breach claim if I agreed to waive my right to pursue recovery of the payments already made. I looked at Patricia. She looked at me. "That's their position," she said neutrally. I thought about Peggy's kitchen. I thought about the lake. I thought about October and the canvas bag in the kitchen and the word she had used. Embarrassment. "No," I said. Novak blinked. "Mrs. Ellison." "The answer is no," I said. "We'll continue." The session ended shortly after. In the elevator down, Patricia said, "They weren't expecting that." "I know," I said. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," I said, and I was. The weeks that followed the mediation were the most methodical of my life. Patricia had advised me that if we were moving toward litigation, we needed to be absolutely thorough. And so we were. She filed for recovery of the $50,400 under unjust enrichment theory in Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court, attaching the full documentary record, bank transfers, the authorization form, the confirmation numbers, and Novak responded by filing a counter-complaint, as expected. But something had changed after the mediation. Whether it was the quality of Patricia's documentation, the specific and damning clarity of the side-by-side bank statement presentation, or the simple fact that my refusal to settle had signaled I was prepared to go further, I didn't know. What I knew was that within 3 weeks of the filings, Novak contacted Patricia to request another settlement discussion. This time, the terms were different. Daniel and Christina agreed to the following: a formal written acknowledgement that I had made 24 monthly payments totaling $50,400 to Keystone Mortgage Services on their behalf, a signed and notarized promissory note for repayment of the full amount over a period of 7 years at 3% interest, which Patricia had structured carefully and which brought the total repayment to just over $58,000. And the withdrawal, with prejudice, of their breach of implied agreement claim. The signing took place on a Tuesday morning at Patricia's office. Daniel came without Christina, who had apparently decided that she did not wish to be present for the formality of her defeat. He sat across from Patricia and the notary, and he signed each page where indicated. His hand moved steadily but slowly, the way a person moves when they are doing something they cannot take back. When it was done, he set the pen down and did not look up immediately. He looked at the table, then he looked at me. "I'm sorry," he said. Not to Patricia, not to the room, to me. The word landed the way words do when they are too late to change anything, but are still true. I looked at my son's face. This face I had known since it was red and new and furious with the shock of being born. And what I felt was complicated in ways I was not going to untangle at a conference table with a notary present. I did not say it was fine. It wasn't fine, and telling him otherwise would have been a kindness he hadn't earned and wouldn't have believed. "I know," I said. He nodded once, slowly, as if that was the answer he had expected and had needed to hear regardless. He stood, shook Patricia's hand with the reflexive politeness of someone running on muscle memory, and left without further conversation. Patricia walked him to the door and came back. We sat for a moment in the quiet of her office, the particular quiet of a concluded thing. "You handled that well," she said. "I handled it honestly," I said, which felt more accurate. But the settlement was only one layer of what had resolved. The other consequence, the one that required no lawyers, no documents, no signatures, had been accumulating by its own weight for months. With no one covering the mortgage and the matter in formal legal proceedings, Keystone's default process had continued its mechanical progress. By the time the settlement was signed, Daniel and Christina were 4 months behind on payments they now had to make entirely on their own. The house on Sycamore Lane entered a workout arrangement with the lender, a modified repayment plan that extended their loan term and significantly increased their monthly obligation going forward. They remained in the house, but barely, and only because Daniel had appealed to his father's side of the family for emergency assistance. Aunts and cousins, who, from what I gathered through the reliable indirect channels that families always maintain, were not entirely pleased to be asked. The conversation, I was told, had been uncomfortable. Daniel had apparently spent years presenting himself and Christina as doing very well. The request reframed that story entirely. Christina's position at her part-time event planning firm ended sometime in late winter. Whether she left voluntarily or was let go, I never learned and did not pursue. What I knew was that she had taken a full-time position at a hotel chain in their corporate events department. Steady work, demanding hours, the kind of role she had always mentioned in the third person, as something other people did when they needed to. I did not take pleasure in picturing her there. That would have required continuing to center her in my thinking, and I had stopped doing that. What I did know was that the life on Sycamore Lane had contracted noticeably. The car lease was returned. The daughter, my granddaughter Lily, and this was the dimension of all of it that still pressed against something unresolved in me, had been withdrawn from the private preschool where she'd been enrolled. Small losses by some measures, but they were the shape of what remained when the invisible support was finally made visible by its absence. The repayment checks began arriving 2 months after the signing. Direct deposits, per the terms, on the 15th of each month. I transferred each one to the account I'd opened with Robert Finch, and did not linger over them. They were not satisfaction. They were simply what was owed, arriving on schedule. I gave notice at Hargrove in March. My supervisor, Phil, shook my hand, said he was sorry to lose me, and I thanked him, and meant it. I cleaned out my locker. I returned my ID badge. I walked down the service corridor for the last time. The one that smelled of cleaning solution and old carpet. The one where I had sat on a bench in the middle of the night, listening to Daniel's careful voicemail. And out through the lobby, and into a cold March morning that smelled like the lake. My hands were free. My schedule was my own. The next part was mine to decide. Spring came slowly that year, the way it does in Cleveland. Tentative, then committed, then suddenly everywhere at once. By April, the tree on the corner of my block had gone from bare to full without me quite catching the moment it happened. I noticed it one morning from my window with my coffee, and I thought, that's how change works usually. Not in the moment of decision, but in the accumulation of small, unremarkable days that follow it. I had spent the first month after leaving Hargrove doing very little of what anyone would call productive, and I had done it deliberately. I slept until 7. I read books all the way through, which I hadn't done in years because I'd always fallen asleep before 10 from exhaustion. I walked along the lakefront in the mornings and along it again in the evenings, if I felt like it. I had coffee with Ruth twice a week. I drove to Columbus every other weekend to see Peggy, and we cooked together and talked until late. And I slept better in her guest room than I had in my own bed for most of the previous 2 years. I was not lonely. That surprised me. Or rather, it confirmed something I had half known for a long time, that the loneliness I had been experiencing wasn't about solitude. It was about being present in a situation that didn't see me. Once I was out of that situation, being alone felt entirely different. It felt like space. That summer, I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center 3 blocks from my apartment. I had always wanted to learn. Gerald had been the artistic one, but somewhere along the way I had absorbed the idea that there were people who did that kind of thing and people who didn't, and I was in the second category. The instructor was a woman named Helene, early 60s, patient and funny, who told me on the first day that the biggest obstacle most adult beginners had was the belief that their work needed to be good. It doesn't need to be good, she said. It needs to be yours. I painted badly for 4 weeks, and then, gradually, less badly. I painted the lake. I painted Peggy's garden. I painted the view from my kitchen window at dusk. In September, I took a trip. I had not traveled in 11 years, since before Gerald died, really. I went to Savannah, Georgia, because I had seen a photograph of it once and thought the squares looked like somewhere I wanted to sit. I sat in 3 of them over 4 days. I ate shrimp and grits at a restaurant near the river and read the entire afternoon. I walked until my feet ached and then walked a little more. I took a photograph of every iron gate I passed. No one needed me to be anywhere. No one was waiting on me. I sent Peggy a postcard. The repayment checks came every month, reliable as weather. I put them away and tried not to think about them too hard, because if I thought about them, I started thinking about everything they represented, and that led to thoughts I was still learning how to sit with. Daniel and I had spoken twice since the signing. Brief, careful conversations, mostly about Lily. He told me she had started kindergarten. He sent a photo. She had Gerald's eyes, which I had not expected to hit me as hard as it did. Was reconciliation possible? I didn't know. I thought it would depend on whether Daniel could build himself into a person capable of it, and that wasn't something I could do for him. What I could do was remain honest and leave the door open, even if I wasn't standing at it. Christina, from what I gathered, was not managing the adjustment well. I heard through indirect channels. Peggy knew someone whose daughter worked in the same social circle. That the house on Sycamore Lane had become a source of constant friction, that the financial pressure had stripped away several layers of the life they had imagined for themselves. The trips they'd posted about on social media had stopped. The dinners with certain friends had thinned out. There was, apparently, a lot of blame being distributed in their household, and very little of it was landing where it originated. Christina had started working full-time again. A position at a hotel chain in their events department, the kind of work she had always described, I had noticed, as something other people did. Whether she was unhappy about it or had found a way to make peace with it, I genuinely didn't know. I was not watching her closely. I had spent too many years in proximity to her evaluation of me to want to spend any of my free time evaluating her in return. What I knew was that the life I had held together for them, the invisible scaffolding of $2,100 a month, the quiet maintenance of a structure they had treated as permanent and given, was not something they could replicate on their own, not at the scale they wanted. Maybe in time they would find a different scale that fit them. That was their work to do. Mine was different. In October, exactly 1 year after the kitchen, after the canvas bag, after the shoes, I sat in Helene's class and worked on a painting of the lake at evening. The water came out in blues and grays with a thin line of gold at the horizon that I hadn't planned and couldn't have planned. Helene stopped at my table and looked at it for a moment. "That's yours," she said. I looked at it. "Yes," I said. "It is." They called me invisible. I let them. Because invisible doesn't mean powerless. It means they forgot to watch. What I learned is this: never let love become a reason to disappear. Generosity given in silence is generosity taken for granted. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to be seen. And you are allowed to let the structure fall if you were the only one holding it up. What would you have done in my place? If this story moved you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And thank you, truly, for listening to the end.